The Sea of Okhotsk stretches cold and gray between the Kamchatka Peninsula and mainland Siberia, a 600,000 square mile basin that Soviet naval commanders call their private lake. In the spring of 1971, Admiral Sergei Gorshkov stands in Pacific Fleet headquarters in Vladivostok, studying charts that show American submarine patrol patterns, all of them stopping at the edge of his territorial waters. He lights a cigarette, the smoke curling toward maps marked with red zones where NATO vessels dare not venture. His confidence isn't arrogance, it's mathematics. The Okhotsk is a natural fortress. Ice chokes the northern passages 9 months a year. Straits connecting it to the Pacific funnel through narrows where Soviet hydrophones listen to every propeller revolution, every hull creak, every mechanical whisper. American attack submarines prowling these approaches make noise, lots of it. Soviet sonar operators can track a Sturgeon-class boat from 40 miles away, the thrashing of its 7-blade propeller echoing through thermoclines like a drum solo in a cathedral. Any American captain crazy enough to penetrate the Okhotsk would be identified, tracked, and depth-charged within hours. Gorshkov taps ash into a brass tray shaped like a submarine. His fleet operates here with impunity, running their Pacific ballistic missile submarines through workups, testing new torpedoes, conducting war games that simulate nuclear strikes against San Diego and Pearl Harbor. Every order, every test result, every tactical innovation flows through secure communications cables running across the ocean floor from Petropavlovsk to mainland command centers. The cables are Soviet-manufactured, Soviet-installed, Soviet-guarded. They represent the backbone of Pacific Fleet coordination, and they're absolutely secure. Or so the briefing papers promise. The Admiral crushes his cigarette and walks to the window overlooking the harbor. Below, Delta-class submarines bob at their moorings, their missile tubes loaded with SSN-8 nuclear warheads. These boats represent Soviet strategic reach, the steel fist that keeps America contained across the Pacific. Their patrol schedules are classified at the highest levels. Their operational doctrine exists only in safes and encrypted transmissions. The Americans can photograph Soviet ships from satellites, can count hulls and measure dimensions, but they cannot penetrate the veil of operational security that shrouds actual Soviet naval thinking. Gorshkov has studied American intelligence capabilities his entire career. He knows about SR-71 overflights, about SOSUS hydrophone arrays strung across the Atlantic, about NSA listening posts in Turkey and Norway intercepting radio signals. He respects American technical sophistication. But the Okhotsk is different. Here, geography itself provides security. The communications cables run too deep for divers, too remote for surface ships, too protected by patrol patterns for any covert approach. The acoustic environment is so hostile that American submarines can't loiter undetected long enough to matter. He returns to his desk, signs off on next month's missile test schedule, and locks the folder in his safe. The schedule will flow to Moscow via the Petropavlovsk cable within hours. Secure, encrypted, untouchable. The hunter was the hunted. But 4,000 miles away, a recording is playing that will shatter everything they believe. The USS Halibut glides through black water at 400 feet, her hull creaking under pressure that would crush a commercial airliner like a beer can. It's October 1971, and Commander John McNish stands in the cramped control room watching sonar displays paint green arcs across cathode screens. His boat isn't hunting Soviet submarines today. She's hunting something far stranger, a communications cable that intelligence analysts swear exists somewhere on this frozen stretch of seafloor. The water outside presses with 175 pounds per square inch. Sonar pings would announce their presence to every Soviet hydrophone within 50 miles. So Halibut creeps forward on passive sensors alone, listening to the ocean's ambient noise. The creak of ice floes above, the biological static of deep water fish, the distant groan of tectonic plates shifting beneath the Okhotsk basin. McNish can smell the recycled air, thick with machine oil and human sweat. Taste the metallic tang that submarine air always carries after weeks submerged. Then the magnetometer needle jumps. The sensor detects ferrous metal below. Not a shipwreck, not geological iron deposits, but something linear and deliberate running across the muddy bottom. McNish orders all stop. The halibut drifts, her momentum bleeding away until she hangs motionless in the water column. Below them, according to the readout, lies a cable approximately 3 inches in diameter, running east-west for as far as the magnetometer can track. This shouldn't exist here. Soviet communications cables are supposed to run along coastal routes where repair ships can access them, where naval patrols can guard them, where geography provides natural protection. But this cable cuts straight across the deepest part of the Okhotsk, 40 miles from the nearest Soviet naval base at Petropavlovsk. No repair buoys mark its location. No patrol boats circle above it. The cable runs naked and unguarded through international waters, protected only by secrecy and the assumption that no one would look for it here. McNish studies the chart. If this cable connects Petropavlovsk to mainland command centers, it carries everything: submarine patrol orders, missile test schedules, tactical doctrine updates, damage assessments, intelligence reports. The Pacific Fleet's entire operational nervous system, pulsing with encrypted data 24 hours a day, lying on the ocean floor like a gift. He calls for the fish. Technicians in the aft compartment activate a custom-built underwater camera sled, lowering it on a reinforced tether through a moon pool cut into halibut's belly. The sled descends through darkness, its lights carving a pale cone in water so clear and cold it feels like falling through space. At 400 feet, the seafloor materializes, gray mud, scattered rocks, and there, running across the bottom like a black snake, the cable. The camera makes 3 passes. The cable shows no damage, no wear, no signs of trawler impacts or anchor drags. Its insulation looks factory fresh. Electromagnetic detectors confirm heavy data traffic flowing through it. Pulses and surges consistent with encrypted voice and teletype communications. The Soviets are using this cable right now, discussing something, ordering something, reporting something. And they have no idea anyone is watching. McNish photographs the coordinates, the cable's depth, its trajectory. He can feel his pulse hammering against his collar. American intelligence has intercepted Soviet communications before. Radio signals, microwave transmissions, diplomatic phone calls, but never anything like this. Never a direct tap into the central nervous system of the Pacific Fleet. The Soviets built their fortress. They secured their waters. They encrypted their transmissions. But they left their front door unlocked. What they find at 400 feet will rewrite the rules of Cold War espionage. 6 months later, Halibut returns to the coordinates carrying a device that looks like a deep-sea coffin. The recording pod measures 20 feet long, weighs 6 tons, and costs more than most Cold War spy satellites. Navy engineers spent 8 months building it at Mare Island Naval Shipyard, working in a classified hangar where technicians with top-secret clearances machined components they weren't allowed to understand. The pod's outer shell can withstand 200 atmospheres of pressure. Its internal systems can operate autonomously for a year without surfacing, without maintenance, without human contact. The technology inside borders on science fiction. Traditional wiretaps require cutting into cables, splicing leads, creating physical breaks that trigger alarms and send repair crews scrambling. But the pod uses inductive coupling, electromagnetic coils that wrap around the cable's exterior and read data signals bleeding through the insulation as faint magnetic fields. No cuts, no splices, no physical intrusion. The cable continues functioning exactly as before, its Soviet operators noticing nothing while American recorders capture every electron flowing through the copper core. McNish watches through Halibut's cameras as Navy divers in specialized atmospheric suits maneuver the pod into position. The water temperature hovers just above freezing. The divers move in slow motion, their breathing loud and mechanical through closed-circuit rebreathers that leave no telltale bubbles rising toward the surface. One diver wraps the inductive collar around the cable, cinching it tight until electromagnetic contact locks. Another anchors the pod to the seafloor with pilings driven into mud. The activation sequence takes 40 minutes. Internal batteries, miniature nuclear reactors no bigger than paint cans, spin up to operational temperature. Recording tapes begin their endless loop, magnetic heads positioned to capture signals the moment they appear. The divers check connections twice, 3 times, then swim back to Halibut's moon pool, their work complete. McNish orders the submarine to withdraw. As Halibut glides away from the site, the pod sits alone on the ocean floor, listening in silence to Soviet secrets flowing past at light speed. The tap works flawlessly. Every conversation between Pacific Fleet headquarters and Moscow flows through that cable. Admirals discussing submarine deployments, technicians reporting missile test results, intelligence officers analyzing American naval movements. The encryption means nothing to the pod. It records the raw signal, storing everything on high-density tape that will be retrieved months later when Halibut returns. NSA cryptographers will crack the codes back in Maryland, but that's a future problem. Right now, the pod simply listens and remembers. Month after month, the recordings accumulate. Soviet Delta-class submarines receive patrol orders through the cable. Departure times, patrol boxes, communications protocols. Missile test schedules flow past, detailing exactly when Soviet ICBMs will launch from Kamchatka test ranges. Tactical doctrine updates reveal how Soviet submarines would respond to NATO attacks, which choke points they'd defend, which sea lanes they'd abandon. The intelligence windfall exceeds every projection. American submarines operating in the Pacific suddenly know Soviet patrol patterns weeks in advance. NATO naval exercises can predict Soviet reactions with eerie accuracy. Satellite reconnaissance focuses on specific naval bases at specific times, because the cable intercepts reveal when interesting activities will occur. And the Soviets notice nothing. Their communications remain encrypted. Their cable shows no physical damage. Their hydrophones detect no American submarines lingering near Petropavlovsk. The fortress remains secure. The private lake remains private. And Admiral Gorshkov continues signing operational orders with the confidence of a man who believes his secrets are safe. The pod records every signature, every order, every secret. By the time the Soviets realize what's happening, America has already heard their deepest secrets. The first hint arrives in August 1973 as a feeling more than evidence. A Delta-class submarine, departing Petropavlovsk for Arctic patrol, encounters an American Los Angeles-class attack boat positioned exactly along its planned transit route. Not near it, not in the general area, but directly astride the classified corridor Soviet doctrine mandates for ballistic missile submarine movements. The encounter could be coincidence. Naval intelligence files it as such. Then it happens again, and again. A November missile test from Kamchatka draws American reconnaissance aircraft that arrive 30 minutes before launch, cameras already positioned to capture every phase of the flight. Soviet counterintelligence officers review the timeline, calculate distances, study weather patterns. The Americans couldn't have seen launch preparations from satellites. Cloud cover obscured the test site for 72 hours before the event. They shouldn't have known. But they were there, lenses focused, recorders running. Captain second-rank Viktor Bogdanov sits in GRU headquarters in Moscow, chain-smoking Belomorkanal cigarettes while studying incident reports that pile higher each month. American submarines appear in places they shouldn't know about. NATO naval exercises adjust their timing to avoid Soviet patrol patterns they shouldn't be able to predict. Intelligence assessments written in Vladivostok seem to leak to Washington before they reach Moscow. The mole hunt begins. Bogdanov authorizes surveillance on 200 Pacific Fleet personnel with access to classified communications. Phones are tapped. Mail is opened. Families are interviewed under the guise of security reviews. Investigators search apartments looking for American radio equipment, microdot cameras, cipher pads, anything suggesting clandestine contact with Western intelligence services. They find nothing. No traitor, no spy, no weak link in the human chain. So they pivot to technical explanations. Perhaps the Americans have broken Soviet naval encryption codes. Cryptographers at the 8th Directorate spend 6 months analyzing every cipher system in use, generating millions of random message tests, searching for mathematical weaknesses that might allow decryption. The codes remain secure. Unbreakable, the mathematicians insist, would require computers that won't exist for decades. Satellite intercepts, then. American reconnaissance satellites can photograph Soviet naval bases from orbit, count ships, measure shadows to determine submarine classes. But satellites cannot read patrol orders. They cannot intercept underwater acoustic signals. They cannot penetrate the steel hulls of submarines to hear crew conversations. The photography explains some American knowledge, but not the tactical precision, not the operational insight, not the ability to predict movements weeks in advance. The paranoia metastasizes. Admiral Gorshkov orders communication protocols changed monthly. Patrol routes shift randomly. Code words replace proper names in all transmissions. Soviet submarines begin receiving orders via one-time pads delivered by courier instead of radio transmission. An operational nightmare that slows response times and degrades fleet coordination. American intelligence capabilities seem to adjust anyway, maintaining their uncanny accuracy. By 1976, the theories grow desperate. Perhaps American submarines have developed silent propulsion so advanced they can loiter undetected in the Okhotsk for weeks. Perhaps the CIA has recruited someone at the highest levels of Soviet naval command. Perhaps the Americans have psychic programs, remote viewing experiments, ESP research that allows them to see through walls and across oceans. Bogdanov crushes another cigarette and stares at the map of the Okhotsk on his office wall. The answer is there, somewhere in that gray expanse of Soviet-controlled water. Something the Americans are doing, some capability they possess, some technique that defies every assumption about Cold War intelligence collection. He just cannot conceive what it might be. The cables beneath his precious fortress carry the truth past him every day. Electromagnetic pulses flowing through copper, bleeding through insulation, whispering to American recorders that should not exist. Their theories grow more desperate as the impossible becomes undeniable. Ronald Pelton walks into the Soviet embassy on 16th Street in Washington, D.C. on January 14, 1980, wearing a suit that cost more than he can afford and carrying secrets worth more than most people earn in a lifetime. He's 38 years old, recently fired from the National Security Agency for financial problems, and drowning in $65,000 of debt from a failed real estate investment. The Marine Guard at the embassy entrance sees another American walk in, probably offering low-grade gossip in exchange for cash. They get 3 or 4 a month. Pelton asks to speak with someone from the KGB. The room they take him to smells like Soviet cigarettes and old furniture polish. 2 men in cheap suits sit across a wooden table, their faces revealing nothing, while Pelton explains what he knows. He worked in NSA's A Group, Soviet Signals Intelligence, for 14 years before his termination. He held top-secret clearances with access to compartmented information. He knows collection methods, technical capabilities, operational details that would cost billions to replace if compromised. The KGB officers lean forward when he mentions Operation Ivy Bells. Pelton describes the cable in the Sea of Okhotsk with the precision of someone who read the operational reports, who saw the photographs, who understood exactly what the recording pod accomplished. He explains the inductive coupling technology, the retrieval missions, the decryption process at NSA headquarters. He knows how long the taps operated, which cables were targeted, what intelligence was collected. Every detail America spent 9 years keeping secret, he delivers in a 2-hour debriefing. The Soviets pay him $35,000 in cash, a small fortune that barely covers his debts but represents the down payment on information that will keep flowing. They want more. They want names of NSA personnel, details of other collection programs, technical specifications for American cryptographic systems. Pelton agrees to everything, his hands shaking slightly as he counts $100 bills that smell like new leather. He returns to the embassy 4 more times over the next 5 years, each visit yielding fragments of classified information traded for cash that evaporates into credit card payments and mortgage arrears. The KGB officers treat him with professional courtesy, but no warmth. He's a source, not an ally, a man who sold his access for personal gain rather than ideological conviction. They pay him $273,000 total, enough to stabilize his finances, not enough to change his life. The photograph he hands over during his second visit changes everything. It shows the recording pod in situ on the Okhotsk seafloor, wrapped around the Soviet cable like a mechanical parasite. The image came from a classified NSA briefing slide Pelton memorized, later sketching from memory with enough detail that Soviet naval engineers can identify the exact location. Pacific Fleet Headquarters receives the intelligence within 48 hours. Admiral Gorshkov, now 70 years old and nearing retirement, reads the report with hands that tremble from more than age. The fortress wasn't breached by satellites or moles or code breaks. It was breached by American divers wrapping electromagnetic sensors around Soviet cables, listening in silence while the Pacific Fleet broadcast its secrets into the void. The paranoia, the investigations, the change protocols, all misdirection, while the real threat sat on the ocean floor, recording everything. Soviet divers deployed to the coordinates within a week, cameras and recovery equipment loaded aboard a specially equipped submarine tender. They know exactly where to look now, exactly what they're searching for, exactly how catastrophically they've been compromised. The photograph he hands over will end the most successful intelligence operation in naval history. The recording pod represented engineering at the edge of physical possibility. Creating a device that could survive a year on the ocean floor while capturing encrypted communications required solving problems that would defeat most defense contractors. Each component had to function flawlessly in an environment more hostile than low Earth orbit. Crushing pressure, near-freezing temperatures, corrosive salt water, and total isolation from human intervention. The inductive coils were the heart of the system. Traditional wiretaps physically penetrate cables, creating detectable breaks in signal continuity. But telecommunications cables leak electromagnetic radiation through their insulation. Faint magnetic fields generated by electrons flowing through copper cores. The pod's coils wrapped around the cable's exterior like a blood pressure cuff, detecting these fields, with enough sensitivity to reconstruct the original signal. The physics were straightforward. The engineering was anything but. Each coil had to maintain precise positioning despite ocean currents that could shift the pod inches per day. Slight misalignment would degrade signal quality, turning clear communications into static-filled garbage. Navy engineers designed a hydraulic clamping system that adjusted pressure automatically, maintaining electromagnetic contact while compensating for cable movement caused by tectonic shifts and thermal expansion. The clamps applied exactly enough force. Too little, and the signal degraded. Too much, and the cable's insulation would compress, potentially triggering Soviet maintenance inspections. Power presented the next impossible challenge. Batteries capable of running the recording systems for a year would weigh more than a school bus and require replacement every few months. So engineers installed miniature nuclear reactors, radioisotope thermoelectric generators using plutonium-238 decay to generate electricity. The same technology powered deep space probes like Voyager, but those operated in the vacuum of space, not under 200 atmospheres of seawater pressure. The RTG housings were machined from titanium alloy, sealed with welds inspected under electron microscopes, then tested in pressure chambers that simulated conditions at 1,000 feet depth. The recording medium had to capture gigabytes of data before gigabytes were a meaningful measurement. Magnetic tape technology in 1971 stored roughly 1 megabyte per reel. Operation Ivy Bells needed to record continuously for months. Engineers developed high-density tape running at ultra-slow speeds, packing data so tightly that playback required specialized equipment at NSA headquarters. The tape mechanisms lived in pressure-compensated housings filled with inert gas, protected from seawater that would corrode the delicate read-write heads within hours. Retrieval created its own nightmare. The pods weighed 6 tons, too heavy for divers to maneuver, too bulky for standard submarine recovery systems. Halibut's moon pool allowed the submarine to position herself directly above the pod, then lower a custom-built grappling frame through the opening in her hull. Navy divers would disconnect the recording modules, removable cassettes containing months of captured data, then install fresh modules for the next collection cycle. The entire operation took 8 hours in freezing water, while Soviet patrol boats circled 40 miles away. Temperature compensation was critical. The Okhotsk's bottom water hovers just above freezing, cold enough to make conventional electronics brittle and unreliable. Every circuit board, every transistor, every solder joint had to function identically at 34 degrees Fahrenheit, as it did during desert testing in Nevada. Thermal cycling tests ran for months, subjecting components to temperature swings that simulated years of operational deployment compressed into weeks. The pressure housings were machined from single billets of steel, their walls 3 inches thick, their seals tested to 500 feet beyond operational depth. Each housing was inspected with ultrasonic scanners searching for microscopic flaws that could propagate into catastrophic failures. A single crack would flood the pod within seconds, destroying months of intelligence and leaving evidence of American espionage scattered across the Soviet seafloor. Every technical obstacle they solved made the operation more impossible to detect. The Soviet recovery team reaches the coordinates on October 18, 1981, aboard a specially equipped submarine tender that lowers remotely operated vehicles through gray water that smells like diesel fuel in anticipation. Captain First Rank, Alexei Suvorov, commands the operation. Standing on the pitching deck, while technicians manipulate joysticks controlling cameras 400 feet below. He's studied the American sketch Pelton provided, memorized the pod's dimensions, prepared recovery equipment based on estimated weight and size. Nothing prepares him for seeing it with his own eyes. The pod sits on the seafloor like a mechanical predator, its titanium skin reflecting floodlights with mirror brightness. The inductive collar wraps around the Soviet cable with surgical precision, its hydraulic clamps showing no corrosion despite months submerged in seawater. Suvorov can see the seals, the housings, the anchoring system driven into mud. American engineering so refined it looks alien against the organic chaos of the ocean bottom. The camera makes 3 complete passes. Suvorov records every detail, every dimension, every visible component. The pod shows no manufacturer markings, no serial numbers, no identifying features. Standard operational security for covert equipment. But the sophistication speaks for itself. This wasn't field-expedient espionage cobbled together from spare parts. This was purpose-built intelligence collection representing millions of dollars and thousands of engineering hours. Recovery takes 4 hours. Soviet divers in atmospheric suits disconnect the inductive collar, photograph the cable junction, then attach lifting cables to hardpoints welded into the pod's frame. A deck crane strains against the weight, hydraulic motors screaming as they haul 6 tons of American surveillance technology toward the surface. Water streams from the pod's vents as it breaks into open air, the titanium shell gleaming like a trophy under overcast skies. Suvorov walks around it on the deck, his boots leaving wet prints on steel plating. The pod is larger than he expected, heavier, more sophisticated. He touches the inductive collar, feels the precision of American machining, the quality of materials that cost more per pound than Soviet submarines. This device represents technological superiority so complete it makes his country's countermeasures look primitive by comparison. The intelligence assessment comes later, written in Moscow by analysts who disassemble the pod component by component. The recording modules are empty. Halibut retrieved the final tapes months before Soviet discovery. But the hardware tells its own story. The nuclear power systems could run for 3 years without maintenance. The recording capacity could capture 6 months of continuous traffic. The inductive sensors could read signals through cable insulation that Soviet engineers thought impenetrable. 10 years. The number appears in classified reports with the weight of a tombstone. From 1971 to 1981, American intelligence listened to Soviet Pacific Fleet communications with the intimacy of a party line wiretap. Every submarine patrol order, every missile test schedule, every tactical doctrine update, every damage assessment, captured, decrypted, analyzed, and distributed to NATO commanders who shaped their strategies around stolen Soviet secrets. Admiral Gorshkov reads the final assessment in his Vladivostok office, the same office where he once dismissed American capabilities with a cigarette and a confident tap of his finger. He's 71 years old now, months from retirement, and this disaster will define his legacy more than any victory. The fortress was violated. The private lake was compromised. The impenetrable communications network was tapped for a decade, while Soviet counterintelligence chased ghosts and moles and broken codes. The Americans never cut a single wire. They simply listened. The pod now sits in a Moscow museum, mounted on a pedestal in a classified facility, where naval officers study it during counterintelligence training. A monument to their humiliation. The pod now sits in a Moscow museum, a monument to their humiliation. The intelligence hall from Operation Ivy Bells filled filing cabinets at NSA headquarters in Fort Meade, Maryland. Thousands of hours of recorded communications that cryptographers spent years decrypting and analysts spent careers interpreting. Each tape retrieved from the Okhotsk seafloor contained fragments of Soviet naval thinking, operational doctrine crystallized in conversations between admirals who believed their words were secure. The advantage wasn't just information. It was insight into how the enemy thought. Submarine patrol patterns emerged first from the recordings. Soviet Delta-class ballistic missile submarines followed predictable routes when departing Petropavlovsk for Arctic patrol stations. Specific corridors chosen for acoustic advantages, thermal layer coverage, and distance from known American SOSUS hydrophone arrays. The cable intercepts revealed not just where Soviet submarines went, but why they chose those routes, which environmental factors Soviet captains prioritized, which NATO capabilities they feared most. American attack submarines adjusted their hunting patterns accordingly. Instead of searching vast ocean areas hoping to stumble across Soviet boats, they positioned themselves along the exact corridors Soviet doctrine mandated. The hunter became the hunted, but the hunted never realized the rules had changed. Soviet submarines continued following optimal routes that were optimal only because Americans didn't know about them, until the cable started talking. Missile test schedules gave NATO intelligence analysts a crystal ball. The intercepts revealed launch dates weeks in advance, allowing American reconnaissance satellites to reposition for optimal observation. Air Force radar stations to calibrate specifically for Soviet ICBM trajectories, and Navy vessels to deploy monitoring equipment along predicted impact zones. Soviet test engineers couldn't understand how American observers appeared with such precision. Their launch schedules were classified higher than most operational plans, distributed only to essential personnel via the secure cable network. The cable told everything. Tactical doctrine weaknesses surfaced in operational discussions between Pacific Fleet headquarters and Moscow. Soviet admirals debated their submarine forces' vulnerabilities, limited diving depth compared to American boats, inferior sonar systems, reactor cooling problems that created acoustic signatures detectable from miles away. These weren't assessments written in formal reports that might be sanitized or exaggerated. These were frank conversations between officers who knew their problems and discussed solutions without political filters. American submarine designers read those intercepts with the attention of students taking notes from the professor's answer key. Every Soviet weakness became an American advantage to exploit. Diving depth limitations informed American torpedo programming. Sonar deficiencies shaped American acoustic deception tactics. Reactor problems guided American strategies for tracking Soviet submarines by their thermal wake signatures. The strategic intelligence reached higher levels. Soviet naval leadership discussed their assessment of American capabilities, what they believed about NATO submarine performance, which American technologies they considered threats, where they thought NATO defenses were strongest. Reading Soviet analysis of American strengths and weaknesses gave Pentagon planners a mirror image of enemy thinking, allowing them to reinforce capabilities Soviets feared while maintaining deceptions about capabilities Soviets overestimated. Diplomatic intelligence flowed through the cable, too. Conversations about arms control negotiations, Soviet positions on submarine-launched ballistic missile limitations, internal debates about whether to accept American proposals or demand additional concessions. American negotiators in Geneva and Vienna walked into treaty discussions knowing exactly what Soviet leadership considered acceptable, which positions were negotiable, which were absolute red lines Moscow would never cross. The advantage gained from that single cable reshaped American Cold War naval strategy for a decade. Every submarine encounter, every treaty negotiation, every tactical doctrine update, informed by stolen Soviet secrets that flowed through electromagnetic coils wrapped around a cable, in water so cold and deep the Soviets thought it impenetrable. The advantage gained from that single cable would echo through every submarine confrontation for years. Operation Ivy Bells established a template that intelligence agencies still follow. The success wasn't just tactical, stealing Soviet secrets for a decade. It was conceptual, proving that technology could achieve invisibility human spies never could. A mole might be discovered through surveillance, interrogation, or simple bad luck. A satellite might be tracked across predictable orbits, but a recording pod sitting silent on the ocean floor, powered by nuclear decay and wrapped around a cable its owners didn't know was compromised, could listen forever. The Soviets learned their lesson with the thoroughness of the humiliated. After recovering the American tap in 1981, Pacific Fleet headquarters ordered complete cable infrastructure reviews. Every undersea communications line was inspected by divers, photographed, tested for electromagnetic anomalies that might indicate inductive coupling. New cables were armored with metallic shielding that blocked signal leakage, making inductive tapping impossible without cutting through protective layers that would trigger immediate alarms. But the doctrine shift went deeper. Soviet naval communications migrated toward radio and satellite transmissions, methods more vulnerable to interception, but at least offering the possibility of detection through signal analysis and direction finding. The paranoia that gripped Soviet counterintelligence during the 1970s wasn't misplaced paranoia after all. The Americans really were listening with capabilities that defied Soviet assumptions about physical security. The Americans didn't stop. Ivy Bells spawned successor operations targeting Soviet cables in the Barents Sea, near Murmansk, along communication routes linking Northern Fleet headquarters to Moscow. Each operation refined the technology: smaller pods, longer operational lifespans, more sophisticated recording systems that could filter specific conversations from background traffic. The cat-and-mouse game between cable tappers and cable defenders continues today, fought in darkness thousands of feet below the surface, where neither side acknowledges the other exists. Ronald Pelton's betrayal eventually caught up with him. The FBI arrested him in 1985 after a KGB defector provided fragmentary information about an NSA employee selling secrets. Pelton's financial records, combined with witness testimony about his embassy visits, built a case strong enough for conviction. He received 3 life sentences and died in federal prison in 2022. His name synonymous with one of the most damaging intelligence betrayals in American history. The pod in Moscow's museum remains classified. Western journalists have requested access for decades, always denied. Soviet, later Russian authorities consider it too operationally sensitive to display publicly, too revealing of vulnerabilities that might still exist in modern cable infrastructure. Photographs leak occasionally, grainy images showing the titanium shell and inductive collar, physical evidence of American ingenuity that embarrassed an entire navy. The intelligence advantage from Operation Ivy Bells extended beyond the Cold War's end. NATO submarine tactics developed in response to Soviet patrol patterns remained relevant as Russian naval forces adopted similar operational doctrines. The technical knowledge gained from designing and deploying the recording pods influenced American underwater surveillance programs that continue monitoring adversary communications today. Different cables, different oceans, same fundamental principle. In the silent war beneath the waves, technological superiority determined victory more certainly than firepower or numbers. The side that could listen without being heard, that could observe without being seen, that could transform the enemy's most secure communications into an open intelligence feed. That side won battles before they were fought, shaped strategies based on enemy thinking, and maintained advantages that seemed impossible until they proved undeniable. The Sea of Okhotsk remains gray and cold, its depths hiding secrets that nations died to protect and competitors killed to obtain. Somewhere in that darkness, Soviet cables still carry Russian naval communications. Whether anyone is listening is a question neither side will answer. In the silent war beneath the waves, the side that listened best won.